Hello, welcome to the December 19th, 2025 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you've not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can ask questions in the live chat field or simply send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase or your Steinberg program is, so if it's, for instance, Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro. Also, if you could indicate which version number, so if it's 12, 13, 14, 15, and the operating system, that information is helpful. And we just to let everyone know, if you don't see an immediate response when you ask a question, it may take a little while as we go through the questions chronologically as asked. So sometimes I may be 20 to 30 minutes behind the live chat, but I'll do my best to catch up throughout the live stream. We should have an index of all the topics that are discussed in today's live stream that will be pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends with timestamps. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, I think we're hovering, we may have crossed 43,000 topics. You could go and do a search at cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that site. We also have two people that serve as moderators, Agent K and Jazz Dude. They're not Steinberg employees. They do it to make it a better community experience. So we want to give a special thanks to them for their efforts. And we'll give an extra round of gratitude for Jazz Dude for his unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a great resource of information for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia in the United States. And if you're watching this live or watching it after, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. With the holidays coming up, this will be the last live stream of the month. We will resume I think maybe the first week of January, if that's going to be maybe January 6th, I believe. I'll just check my calendar really quick. So we will kick back up on January 6th with our normal schedule. I will miss maybe a week of live streams in January because I'll be at the NAMM show. And since it's the last live stream today, we will be doing our Zoom meetup in about 2 hours. I'll go ahead and paste the link. And if you want to just kind of see the link here, let me just open up Zoom and see if we could come over and show the information here. Let's see if you want to look at the meeting ID, and this if people are watching this after, so this will just be live. So if you're watching this tomorrow, this Zoom info isn't good. It will be live going on in about 2 hours, but the meeting ID here with the passcode. So I just want, sometimes when we post it, I will also kind of post the link in the chat field as well. But again, you could use this information. I'll try to refer to that about every half hour until we get going. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. All right, so our first question we have is a Cubase 15 drum machine. We have more than 20 drum samples we need to render and want it as a WAV file. What's the way I could export tempo changes if not applied on it? What ways to do it? All right, so let's go ahead and we'll just set this up. I'll just do a new project here. All right, so I'll add a drum track. Okay, let me check my audio setup here quickly. Sorry about that. All right, so let me just go ahead and see if we could just generate sounds. Seems like it should be up. I'm sorry. Okay, so let's say we have our pattern here. All right, so I think if we're using the drum machine before we render, that we may have to just simply copy and drag the events, because we're going to render particular events, but not, if it's actually just going on in the particular sequence, when we go to render. So now what we could do is so now that we've dragged this pattern over, I could select this particular track, and let's do, I think we could even do just a render in place. So we'll come over here, go to edit, to render in place. We'll get to our render settings. We'll say our channel settings. And now that there's an actual event there, that's when we could choose to just render directly in place right there. So if I change my settings one more time, so I'll just come here, let's get to my render settings, and I will choose to just mute the source tracks. So if it's just kind of running by itself in sync, there's nothing to really edit per se. So, but now when we come over, you could just render that. Now let's say if we have like a tempo map. So, and the second part of the question was, if I export the tempo changes is not applied on it, what ways to do it kindly? All right, so let's go ahead and just do a tempo track. All right, so now we'll listen to it. All right, so now that we have particular tempo, so I'll come over here, we'll select some of our events, we will go to our render in place, and we'll mute our original source events. So now as we do this, we'll render. So now, and I will take it out of punch in and punch out. All right, so now we'll listen to the click track with the rendered file. Here it's speeding up and slowing down. So if you are just kind of playing this in sync, there's nothing to render, there's no event to render. You could, record it as audio if you really needed to, but I would just kind of drag the events to the project window and do the rendering there. All right. All right, so we see from O Studio USA, says, hello, Greg. After I export my Atmos mix using the ADM authorizer, no ADM file is available. It's a WAV file that when dragged back in Cubase shows as one track with multiple tracks. Help. Hope that all made sense. I did contact customer service and they couldn't figure out either. Maybe I'm not running something correctly inside the mix. So it's not creating an ADM. Thank you in advance. So let's go ahead and say if we are here, let me just open up this project. So, Cubase doesn't, it exports ADMs, but it doesn't actually import ADMs. So, there's not probably a good way for you to test that. And an ADM file is often just, as you described, different WAV files with the object metadata. So let's say if we're here. right, let me see if I can get this, do my ADM set up here. Make sure that we're okay, and let me just get to the renderer plugin. And make sure that we're monitoring binaurally. Just let me see if I may need to recreate it here. I'll just do it from scratch here. All right, so I can check my sample rate. Okay, so we're all right, and let's go ahead and do binaural monitoring. So if you have headphones on. All right, so say all right, so now when we go to export our ADM, so, once again, Cubase isn't going to have the ability of importing your ADM. So if you're testing it that way, it's probably not going to, import the ADM file. So let's say we'll come over here to our ADM authoring. We'll say export our ADM file. So, and again, when you see this, it's going to, actually, kind of put those different files in, but it's not going to do kind of, all the object tracking. So we'll call this December 19th. I'll save it to the desktop. So let's say if I open up Nuendo, now Nuendo can't import ADM files. So now when we come over here, you can see that we have the import to ADM. And then, so there we could see the bed, all the bed channels and everything kind of rendered just like that. So, once again, Cubase doesn't import the ADM file. So that's probably why you're just seeing it as you are. So we see Stefan joining from Sweden, and we have Uno Memento from Finland, VS Terra Nova joining from Amsterdam. Always wonderful to see Jazz Dude on. All right, so we see Roland Stuff says sending season's greetings to Greg and all global Cubase users from Sussex. We have Benny joining. Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. His cat Buddy is waving a paw hello. This is my cat Steven and Margrave's dog Stella and other pets that are nearby. All right, so we have Sikin Ata 50 sending greetings from Finland. Great to have you on. We have our Finnish contingent here. All right, Roland Stuff just says, hi Greg, it can take me a while to create the best vocal harmonies in the first verse of a song using VariAudio, so I'm looking for a quick way to copy those harmonies across to other verses. It says, I thought the score editor might be a way to do that, as I can see which harmony notes I created in earlier verses, but it doesn't appear as an option under editor. Any ideas? All right, so let's take a look. Say we want to create harmonies. Okay, so let's say all right, so let's say we're going to take our piano part here and grab this and move it up to the chord track and do the analysis of that. So what I would do, let's see if, I'm not sure if I actually have. You know, what I would probably do if you wanted to copy the harmonies, you know, I would, you know, so once you have the chord track figured out, so say I want to do a harmony there, I would just simply select the range, go to your project menu to generate harmony voices under audio. Sorry. So we'll generate, I'll do 2 harmony voices here. Okay, and let's say maybe I want to bring their gain down just a little bit so it's more. And if I wanted that, even though it's kind of different lyrics in this example, you could just copy those over holding down like kind of the Alt or Option key. So once I've done the harmonies there, so even though those are different lyrics, it still sounded like surprisingly good. So. But unlike kind of like a MIDI editor, like once we're in like the VariAudio editor here, so let's say if we come right over here, we go to VariAudio, at that point, you know, this is going to be kind of a segment of that particular file. So it's not like I could just come over here and say, okay, I want to move this over time. So this is kind of intrinsically tied to the data that's there, and unlike a MIDI performance where we could just simply, you know, move the different elements around here, we're kind of adjusting the pitch, but we're not copying those particular segments. But if you generate kind of the harmonies once, using the generate harmonies, that you could just simply, you know, copy this as audio events on the project window. So the VariAudio is kind of more reflecting and indicating the data that's there and not kind of manipulating it kind of like, you know, while you could do a lot of manipulation as if you're in the MIDI domain, it's not like freely moving events around like MIDI. So, but let me know if I'm misunderstanding. Thanks for your question. All right, we see Michael Teams joining from Weatherford, Texas. All right, we see Alexander on. Thanks for joining us. Okay. We see Flyvy Vince joining from Winnipeg. Great to see you on. We have Rick France joining from Pacific Northwest, wishing everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So we see, Greg, what's happening with the D-reverb function in Spectral Pro 12, noises, crackle, etc. All right, so let's take a look. Let me just go ahead and render a file. So I think let's put some, I think we have reverb on our lead vocal here.
Not a sound, tell me why.
Okay, so let's come over here and let's render that particular track. I'll just not have it muted. Okay, so now we have this is the rendered file. All right, so let's go over here. Let's run it into Spectral Layers 12. Okay, let's pull up our modules. And it's D-reverb. All right, let's try at maybe 75%-ish. All right, now we can listen to the file.
Not a sound, tell me why. Something's wrong, we can't go on.
Let's try another round of it.
Tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, even in this example, you know, like a lot of D-reverbers, it's kind of a difficult thing to do. So,
Sound, tell me why. Something's wrong.
so, but I do hear some artifacts, but you know, if you have a particular file, I'd be happy to send it to the developer and he can maybe take a look at like a particular file that you're having. He's usually very responsive for that type of, you know, I know I've sent him files and he's been able to kind of tweak algorithms and stuff like that in the past. But sorry you ran into that. Not working as you expected. All right, we see Matt Elston joining. Wishing everyone happy holidays for everyone that's celebrating. All right, so we see Miguel for the world just says, hi Greg, please, is there a solution for Cubase Pro 15 and problem with recording audio with vocals on high notes? This doesn't happen in Cubase 14. So I think we tried to create this earlier, and I wasn't able to recreate it, but you know, it seemed like maybe, and I'm not sure if you asked about it earlier, but you know, to see if maybe you had a noise gate on. So let's just we'll do a synthesizer here, and we'll play up high. Okay. So I will come over, let's just, all right, so we can hear that frequency. So I'm going to add an audio track. So I'm not sure if you have any processing on the input channel, any processing on the track like a noise gate. But let's say I want to take this input directly from RetroLog for this audio track, and we'll go ahead and record. All right, so let's say as we're recording. All right, I'll record the audio, kick that in. So let's say, and I'll go up an octave. Probably freaking some dogs out. All right, now let's go ahead and just listen to the audio as it is and see if it's breaking up or losing. So it doesn't seem like it's losing any of the high frequencies, but if I put a gate, like if I take this particular channel and we put a noise gate on it, so let's say we just go to our channel strip and we enable the gate. But if we bypass the gate, but that gate may cut off because the high frequencies may not have kind of the same level of, so let's say if we do just this part here with no gate, that's recording and playing back as expected. I will turn on a gate. So make sure you don't have any processing on the channel, but I don't think even in kind of like a whistle tone from a singer that's going to get much higher than that. But let me know if anyone else has run into that. We're recording a high frequency note. Where it cuts out. All right, so we see EK Sensei says, hi, recently got back into having fun with music. Cubase is my go-to DAW. I have a tiny question. Can we play MIDI notes in Cubase using the computer keyboard? Yeah, so to do that, all you have to do is if you hit Alt or Option plus the letter K. So I'm going to come right over here. So Alt or Option K. So we can think of that for keyboard, and then you could use like your Q. WERTYUI, and this will just kind of mimic, and you could actually see what keys are being utilized here. And if you wanted to change the octave, so you can then use the on-screen keyboard, and to close that, you can just hit Alt or Option plus K again. Now, when you have it open, you may need to see that if you're using the keyboard function, like keyboard shortcuts, may be blocked if you have the virtual keyboard open. So if like all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm hitting F3 to open the mixer and it's not doing it, it's because once you have the keyboard open, the keys are assigned to the particular to the on-screen keyboard. So Alt or Option plus the letter K, and then you could click here and see the notes or which particular keys on your, and you could resize it as well as needed. So you can see the keyboard there. So, and it's great that you're back to making music, and we're happy to have you using Cubase for that. All right, Rick France says, any update on a Stream Deck profile you're working on? So it's kind of my goal over the Christmas break to get it all dialed in for Cubase 15. So I have some downtime. When I did it on the Mac, all of the font sizes changed when I opened it on the PC, and you had to go into each assigned key, which is, I think I had over 1500, and readjust the font size because the font size didn't carry over from Mac to PC. So that's kind of what I'm in the middle of doing. It's kind of a silly thing to have to do, but it is what it is. All right, we see John Costigan checking in from Kenosha, Wisconsin. All right, so we see HS Products, HSP Products says, hi Greg, I bought Groove Agent 5. Now that SE6 is released and based on a newer version, does this mean that there will be no Groove Agent 6 for Groove Agent 5 users? So I would anticipate that nothing has been officially announced, that probably what we, when we do some, Groove Agent 6 SE is kind of a, very incredibly powerful drum machine, but it is kind of a subset of features of like the full version. So when we do the full version, there's more in there and it takes longer to develop. So I think if I were to speculate, I would say that there's probably going to be a Groove Agent 6, just purely on speculation on my part. All right, Michael Teams is giving Tim K 1 gallon of chocolate chip ice cream. All right, so we have Soren checking in from Sweden. All right, Constantine Official asks, hey, can you walk through the best way to make a template without having to include the audio or MIDI events of a previous project, and also the safest way so as not to delete files from another project? Thanks. All right, so what I think is a good, clever way of doing this quickly is, let's say, if we have a project, so I'll just open up project here. So let's say, okay, I like, we have like a large band with, multiple vocal tracks, and let's say we're happy with this particular, and I wanted to use this as the basis for a template, but I don't want to have to worry about getting rid of files, accidentally deleting files. I would just come right over here. I would do a new project. All right, so we'll just create empty. And we'll get to the file menu, and we're going to say import tracks from project. All right, so I'm going to find that particular project. Okay, so we'll come right over here and say, okay, I'm going to take this project. Now, when we do this, what we could do is we say track data to be imported. I'm going to first select all of my tracks, and I'm going to uncheck import events and parts. So once I do that, I'm going to say, okay, I could also exclude automation, so if I'm not including the events and parts, but I probably may want to have the channel and inspector settings. So now when I hit OK, all of the data from the particular project, or all the tracks with all of their settings, are imported, kind of as expected, but no media. And then at this point, just choose to save as a template. And this way, like, this project has never had any association with any media. So at that point, when you just save it as a template, it's not going to be every time you start a project from that template, it's not going to include audio files or MIDI events from the kind of the origin project. So again, once you come over here, go to import tracks from project, select the particular project that you want to use as the basis, and uncheck events and parts. And you probably want to uncheck automation. You don't want automation from a different song to be applied in there. So give that a try, and I think that will do the trick for you. All right, so we see from Craig Nobles, great to see you on. Says, hey Greg, is there a way to set up a preset containing a group of tracks, such as drums, that could also contain a group track for those particular tracks. Okay, so if we want to, so what we could do is just simply save it as a track archive. So I'll just do it quickly here. Another project. Okay. All right, so let's say I want to take all my drums, and we could route these. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to let's add a group track to these. Okay, so we'll call this our drums group. Okay, so what I want to do now, and let's say in this case, I don't want to save, like, you know, just like in our previous question, we don't want to save the event. So now what I want to do, I'm going to select all of those drum tracks with the group track, and we're going to go to your file menu and export audio mix down, or we're going to export selected tracks. Okay. And at this point, we'll say, okay, hit OK. So we'll call this, we'll put it to our desktop. All right. Sorry, let me just put on a new folder. So we're going to export to selected tracks. All right, and now let's do new project. And you could also just use the import tracks from project as well. But let's create empty. And let's import the track. And we export to selected tracks, and we want to import our track archive. So now when I do this, here's our drum group. I will take that. We'll select all the tracks, and now my tracks with the group and their routing to the drum group can automatically be preserved for you. So you want to export selected tracks and then import as a track archive. And you could also include, you know, different effects channels with that as well. All right, Michael Teams is granted Matt Elliston 1 gallon of strawberry cheesecake ice cream, and John Costigan has received 1 gallon of butter pecan ice cream. All right, I'm gonna just share the Zoom meeting credentials. We'll be starting in about an hour and 20 minutes, but it's ID 896-5101-3992, and here's the passcode, just so, and we'll be doing this about an hour and 20 minutes, so if you're watching this after the Zoom, you could just ignore that, but just so that people could see it, and I'll paste the link again in the chat. Okay. So HSP products, can I save my own custom kits, samples, settings, and patterns together as a preset in Groove Agent? So yeah, so let's go ahead. We'll come over here. Let's just load up an instance of Groove Agent. Okay, so let's say I wanted to go to just get to my favorites. Let's do just a quick. Just see if I get, so let's say I want to do snares. So I'm going to drag my snares over to multiple pads here. Okay, so and now at this point I want to, let's say if we go to our player and we choose to, okay, I want to, and this is not going to be the most interesting part, but let's say if we now kind of play, we could, all right, so let's say, you know, we like this, we have our samples, and now if when we want to save a particular preset, we could just say, okay, let's save this as December 19th, 2025. Now, if we want to have a, so we could call that up, but let's say if we want like the actual samples to be tied directly into, like, you know, we wanted to move it to a different computer, or we wanted to put those samples into a particular, like into the project folder. So when we move the project folder, everything is there. So here what we could do is we could just simply choose to export. If we right click on the agent, once we have that, we could export the kit with the samples, and you could just choose to place it into the project folder, and then you could, you know, have a, you know, your particular Groove Agent kit saved with the samples with the correct hierarchy anywhere that you choose. All right, so Tim Weinheimer, good to see you on, says how to add a chord track to existing MIDI track to work with the original chords. I played in the middle MIDI track. Okay, so let's say if we have jump over here. Okay, so one of the cool things that you could have with chord tracks is track versions. So let's say we want to do a new track version. All right, so we see how to add a chord track to existing MIDI track to work with the original chords. Okay, so let me just make sure I'm understanding. Let me just go back here. All right, so how to add a chord track to existing MIDI track to work with the original chords I played in the MIDI track. So really all you have to do, there's kind of two different approaches. So one is just to take like the MIDI event here. So let's say we want to take our piano event and just simply drag it to a chord track. So you could do it like that. Or if you select the track here, so let's say we select the track. If you go to the project menu to chord track, you could say create chord events, and that would automatically add the chord track for you. So let me know if that's what you want to do, Tim, or if you want to do something else. All right. Let's see. Tim K's cat buddies appreciating the seafood platter, and he's enjoying the chocolate chip ice cream. Sounds very seasonal and Christmassy. So, all right, we have Steve Leeds joining from Berkeley, California. All right, HSP Products just asked, can Groove Agent time stretch an audio loop to the project tempo inside patterns? Okay, I think we could do that. Okay, so we'll create an empty project. All right, so let's go ahead and just grab a quick drum loop here. Okay, so let's drag this over. All right, so right now when we play this back, we'll listen to, just move my controller down an octave. All right, so right now our tempo is 120 beats a minute. I will take it from 120 to 160, and I think looks like that's automatically playing, following the tempo. But what you can do if it doesn't, I think if we go here to, and they may have changed the default setting. So let's say if we go to the sample here, let me see if it's under sample, and select warp, you could automatically sync to tempo. So if this is set to off, it's going to play back at the original tempo. But now if we, so again, if when you go to the sample tab, select warp, and now you could say automatically sync to the tempo. So if I slow down, let's say from 120 to 100, that loop will automatically sync again its original tempo now to the project tempo. So if I change my project tempo to 160, so again, as we just trigger that sample is going to automatically follow the project tempo. All right. All right, so we have Parabot 2 on. Great to see you. Great to see you back. Music Magic's Musicians saying hi to everyone. Right, sorry, my chat field jumped. Let me just find. All right, Music Magic's Musicians asks, how can I place a plugin between 2 or 3 inserts? I've always tried to only move the bottommost plugin in the inserts one at a time, adding another plugin in between. Alternatively, if I add a plugin to adjacent inserts and attempt to fit it inside from the side, is there a way for me to add a plugin to any of the slots seamlessly? All right, so let's go ahead and add a couple plugins. Okay, so let's say we want to add a plugin. We have 4 plugins currently. We want to add a plugin in between. All right, so what we can do if you just want to kind of drag and drop. So let's say we go here to the media bay. So we'll go home. Let's go to our VST effects. So let's say, okay, I want to go to grab my chopper plugin. So now when I come here, I could just drag. And now the chopper is placed in the middle. So let's say I want to put the studio chorus between the first and third plugins. Here I could just simply, we could just simply drag and drop. So if we do it there, and you could also just simply change the order of plugins like this. So if you want to change the order around. But if you just drag and drop when you go to add a new plugin, you can say, okay, I want it in that slot, and then you could just seamlessly place it right in. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Michael Team says, howdy Greg, had a crazy problem last night loading a project, froze computer on channel load, rebooted safe mode, and found one of the tracks had lost its data. That was the lockup. Any ideas? So sometimes if you run into scenarios like that, try to come over and, see if you can do like, if you have a, check to see one, if that audio file is in the project, and you probably have a backup. And then you could try doing the import tracks from project and say, okay, like this one audio file isn't cooperating as much as I would, isn't cooperating as expected. So then I can say, okay, I want to import just that track, and let's say with data, and At that point, you could kind of load up different parts of the project independently. And so you could always try to import the tracks from the project and even call it up from a backup project, and you'll probably be able to get it directly in. All right, David M asks, great to see you on from Liverpool, or just outside Liverpool. Greg, do you need to install Halion Sonic or Groove Agent SE if you have Halion 7 and Groove Agent 5? I have all the contents downloaded. You don't need to, but usually, like Groove Agent by itself and Halion Sonic by itself aren't that large, data-wise. So, unless you're like really hard up for particular hard disk space, you could keep it in. I think like if you work with MIDI files, it could be that if you have the preference to load up a general MIDI sounds, if if you have kind of the general MIDI sounds as the preference. So let's say if we come over here to the settings, so it may not load up sounds if you're working with general MIDI files. But just kind of, so if that is the choice and you load up a MIDI file and it's not assigning sounds as you expect, that's because it's kind of designed to work with Halion Sonic. So those sounds can work inside of Halion, but it's going to look to Halion Sonic to actually load up. So if you're not doing general MIDI files, then you wouldn't have to worry about it, I would say. Okay, so we see from Alexander says, Greg, you rendered a voice without the reverb. It's on the send. No, when I rendered, it was rendered. Let's see if I still have the project open. All right, so I'll just render it again here. So let's say we have, let me just not do it from, all right, I think it was, all right, so this, all right, so on this track, let me just,
Not a sound.
okay, here I'll just do a direct offline processing for it. Okay, so now,
Not a sound. Tell me.
so we look at the channel here, sorry for,
Something's wrong.
so we have no inserts, no sends.
Living a lie.
So that's rendered in. So let's go ahead and go to our spectral layers.
Not a sound. Tell me why. Something's wrong.
So we'll take a couple of passes at it.
Tell me why. Something's wrong. We can't go on.
So I mean, I hear artifacts in there, which may be what you're hearing as well. So and that's in Spectral Layers 12 Pro. All right, so we see from Roland stuff just says, hi Greg, says regarding copying harmonies from one verse to another, maybe I could turn the first verse VariAudio harmony into a MIDI part and then just turn that into a score as a reference for later verses. Yeah, I mean, if you want, if the goal is to have it printed out, for like other musicians to read, if you're going to other musicians, you're like, okay, sing this harmony part here, here's the notation, then I think it makes sense. But I don't think that you gain any benefit if you're looking to kind of have the harmonies kind of in, sounding in different spots. So let me know if you need to print it out. And, you can always go old school and just simply, fly in, harmonies with the sampler track, All right, so we see from Vince Flyvey asks, what are the 4 symbols in the mixing archive? Bypass different things besides the track, read and write, mixing on. So let me see if it's in like maybe the full screen mixer. I think it's maybe in the States. So here, these, and I think if it's these, you could choose to bypass modulators, bypass inserts for all the selected, or bypass EQs or sends. So let me know if that's kind of what it does. And if you kind of hover over, then you could get a sense of what is being bypassed directly there. All right, wonderful to see Millard Brown checking in from Pennsylvania. Thanks for being online with us. All right, so we see from Miguel for the World says, I'm trying to record vocals, and when I hit high notes, it's like Cubase stops working. This only happens when I'm recording vocals, and I'm not recording with any processing. So if you have an example that you want to share with me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to take a look at it. Let me know if you hear the file being, like, as you're monitoring the recording, if you hear the high notes, and then let me know if when you look at it in Cubase, if it is, like if you see the waveform and then it's not playing back, or when it's cutting out on the high notes that you just simply see, if you see a blank area. So, but, if you want to even send a screenshot to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or share a project with like Dropbox or, WeTransfer or something like that, I'd be happy to take a look at it. But it seems like it's recording fine here. And let me know if you record audio from like a synthesizer, if it cuts off the same thing, and what your signal flow is. So if you're going like your microphone straight into your audio interface, or if it's going into like a preamp channel strip that has a compressor and noise gate on it. So if you could let me know those things, give me a little more details, Miguel, I'd be happy to help. All right, so we see Jeff Sabelski on from Chico, California. Thanks for joining us. And Uno Mementos received 1 gallon of rum raisin ice cream. All right, Millard Brown has received 1 gallon of peanut butter crunch ice cream. All right, so we see from EK Sensei, just says, thank you, Greg, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all. Thanks for the great holiday wishes. And we see Jason Wood says, hi, Greg, many thanks for your absolutely invaluable Cubase tuitions. I'm always grateful to be able to help people. And we see Jeff Sabelski's received 1 gallon of Dreamsicle ice cream. All right, we have Thermonuclear War joining from Serbia. Great to see you back. All right, Virtual Alan, great to see you on. Sending greetings from Scotland. He wants everyone to have a dram on me. It sounds like one of those clever Scottish things. Great Scottish slang. Looking forward to hanging out with my Scottish friend at the NAMM show next month, Mr. Paul Wishart. All right, David M. Just saying, Greg, can you go over using direct offline processing in Cubase 15 on a PC with a Windows 10? Has it changed? Not used this for years. Yep, so what the direct offline processing will allow you to do, so just like what I did here in this particular setup. So if we wanted to just basically embed the effects into the file, that's what our direct offline processing would do. So let's say I'm at someone's house and I'm doing a session and they have a really cool plugin and I want to get the sound of that plugin onto my file. But let's say I don't feel like buying the plugin when I'm home, but I'm at their studio with my project and let's say they have like, the really top end lexicon reverbs. And you're like, oh, that just sounds magical on my particular file. So what we could do is just say, okay, I want to be able to take a reverb. So let's say I'm at someone else's studio, or my computer is running slow. I'm kind of pushing the boundaries of my audio processing. So let's say, I just want to come over here and I wanted a plate reverb. So let's say, okay, I came over here. So what this is going to do is, I'll use a different reverb. What this will do, get my license updated for that, is, so I'm going to say, let's just add our effects. So we'll say, okay, I want to have the reference reverb, and let's go for one of the plates. Okay, so now this effect has been rendered directly onto the file. So as we play this file back, it's playing an audio file that's been rendered with that processing. Now you may go, okay, that's probably, now, even though it's rendered, we kind of think of that as being fairly permanent. So let's say, okay, I probably wanted to adjust the mix down here. So let's say, okay, I want this to be maybe 34%. So now I could make a change here. So once I select the event, you could hit F7, and now I could change the settings. And let's say, okay, now I want to run this through a delay. So we'll just come over here. And let's add another plugin. All right, so when I go to, and a lot of people think that this is permanent once you do it, it's like you can't undo it. But Cubase is smart enough to actually take all of the processes and keep the original file. So let's say you open this up, 10 minutes later or 10 years later, and you're listening, and it's like, oh, that's before I knew how to use a delay. I wish that I could take the delay out without affecting the reverb or the flanger. So even though what I can do now is just select this, we can go into kind of a non-linear manner, and I could just choose to delete the delay. So now we're just going to have the reverb and a flanger. Or if I wanted to change the order, so I want the flanger first, and I wanted the flanger to be reverbed. And I want to take this and, let's say, invert the phase of that particular track, just to give it a different flavor. So I could change the order. So say, okay, let's invert the phase first. Let's put the flanger after. So this will go through and basically apply and render all of those particular effects directly to the file. So when we play it, we could have like huge processing chains, and it's being rendered to the file. But again, it's not permanent because each step can be removed independently. We could reorder even after saving, and just right clicking, we can say let's just delete all, and we're right back to where we were originally with the file. So it allows you basically to kind of selectively render different processing to files. All right, I'm going to paste the Zoom link. We'll be starting in about an hour. And if you haven't joined a Zoom social, I'll pull up the... so this will be the meeting ID number. So you could just join if you go to zoom.com with the passcode. And there's a link that's in the chat field. All right, now we'll go back to answering some questions. Okay. See, Jeff Sabelski says he does like his Absolute bundle. We see O Studios USA says, thank you, Greg, for answering my Atmos question. Once again, a few videos I watched were the older versions of Cubase that used to have ADM in the drop-down menu on the import. So Cubase has never had the import from ADM. It's always been kind of a Nuendo-specific feature. So maybe they're running Nuendo as opposed to Cubase, and they look very similar, as you may have noticed. All right, HSP Products asks, in Cubase Pro 14, what is the practical difference between Zoom Zap and Zoom presets? When should one be used, and why are both available as keyboard shortcuts? Okay, so let's take a look. I'll just kind of, let's say we want to work with like our different Zoom states. Okay, so let's come over here. We'll activate this project. All right, and I'll go to my MIDI remote and say, okay, let's come over. Okay, so I want to set up some. So I'm going to take this, and let's say we're doing like, working on our lead vocal, right? So I'm going to come over here and we'll just do a Zoom Zap. Okay, so we'll assign this to particular function. So I think I could just type in Zap. All right, so I'm going to now come over here and assign it to this particular button. All right, now when I come over here, let's say we want to set this, and we'll go to Zoom, and I think we could just sort this as Zoom preset. All right, so let's say, okay, I want this to be Zoom preset 1, and let's say Zoom preset 2. All right, so when we do Zoom Zap, let's say I'm working on this. All right, so let's say, okay, I really want to have the vocal kind of zoomed at this level. And I think if we come over, so I think if I hit the Zoom Zap button now, I may have to just, let me assign another button here. Give me a second. Okay, so we have the Zoom Mem button here. Okay, so let's say I want to always be able to go back to the vocal kind of at this. I'm going to say Zoom Mem. All right, so now So now I could just, so once we have, like, if we're kind of constantly going back and forth, and let's say I adjust my zoom here, so you could capture it with the zoom mem button, and then when I hit zoom zap, we could just go directly back to that zoom state right there. So we say, okay, I want to see my vocal at this level of zoom. I hit zoom mem, and then whenever I need to go back to do, like, I'm doing like bass editing here, it's like, oh, let me jump back to our vocal, and now I could just go right back to where we were. So that will zoom to position as well as that state. Now, an overall zoom preset, when we come over here, let's say, okay, I want to take all of these files in my project. All right, and I think if we come over here, that we could save it as a zoom preset. Let me see if it's... So, and then we could recall kind of the, just, all right, so let's say, right, and let's go ahead and save, add. So now I could just go back to different preset zoom configurations. But zoom zap, once you hit zoom mem, you could instantly kind of recall the position and the zoom state. So if you're always kind of working on a tricky part that you want to go back to at a particular zoom level, at that point you could just hit the zoom zap, and that will take you right back to that particular zoom settings where you were, with the actual position recalled as well. All right, Alexander just asks, Greg, which Cubase stock plugins in your top in every project? Just interesting. So my reverb, I tend to go for Reverence. There's a lot of great convolution IRs. I like the studio delay quite a bit if I want to do really creative delays, the multi-tap delay. For creative stuff, like, you want to be able to kind of change stuff in very creative ways, I would probably use more of, like, the FX modulator. I like the new Ultra Shaper compressor, but Black Valve is also great for vocals. The vocal chain is hard to beat because everything is kind of so accessible. I would say that, you probably won't be disappointed in using Steinberg plugins. So, a lot of programs had developed reputations for having kind of, we'll call it batteries included plugins. Like, you get a new toy for Christmas and you get like the really off-brand batteries just to kind of have something. But, obviously Steinberg invented VST and VST plugins. So we've been doing it longer than other companies. So, there's a lot of really fantastic plugins. So don't sleep on the built-in plugins. I know, when we look at marketing materials for plugins, it always seems like this one plugin will solve all your problems. But I tend not to use a lot of third-party plugins because I don't have to. All right. All right, HSP Products says, my Mac is limited to Mac OS Ventura, and because I can't upgrade to Cubase Pro 15, is there any workaround, alternative solution, or do I need to buy a newer Mac to run Cubase Pro 15? Check out, run the trial version. So sometimes when something is cut off, it could mean that, maybe that it's, sometimes it may still work, but the company won't officially do quality assurance tests on that particular operating system. So after a certain point, if you're going, okay, we have to as we do a program, we have to make it work with every version of Tahoe, every version of, Sequoia. And, Sequoia may have 8 versions and updates. So they may not just simply go back to, previous operating systems at some point. And that's why, so sometimes it may still work, but they're just not doing quality assurance testing on it. So I would try the trial version, and if you have and see if that's working for you. Because a lot of times people can still run on older operating systems, but it's just not tested and officially supported. So, and that's why it's a great time to try out a trial version. And I think Jazz Dude just says, you can get a new Mac for $500, a little Mac Mini or something. But, try the trial version. So. Yeah, we see a comment from Jeff Sabelski says some college professors as brass players seem to be very steadfast on Finale when I mentioned Dorico Pro. And, Finale obviously isn't going to be doing any development. And I think we have hundreds of thousands of very satisfied users that have migrated from Finale to Dorico. So. All right, Jason Wood, 9312 says, Greg, I do have a question. Why I can't get my Spectral Layers Pro 12 to come up into my extension in Cubase Pro 15 on Windows 11 Pro? My outboards, UR824, UR22C, CC121. So generally, I would make sure that, you had the latest versions of Spectral Layers. But, it should automatically show up as extensions. So sometimes I've seen, make sure that, but generally it always kind of shows up. But I could do some, but try to see what happens. Like, maybe if you start with disabled preferences, where you could hold down like the, since you're on Windows 11 Pro, hold down Alt Control plus Shift when you start and see if you disable preferences, if you see the extensions show up there as well. And if you want to email me, I'd be happy to kind of look into it a little bit, see if there's a trick that could do it, and I'll respond over the holidays. All right, so we see Craig Nobles just says, thanks, Craig. Does that process preserve FX? I see maybe Fox, but I'm assuming FX on each track. So if you do the, export the selected tracks, that would include all the processing, EQs, and channel strips as well. All right, so we see, hi Greg, Dorico Pro 6 versus Cubase Pro 15 on editing key switches in play mode. So I think they both work really well. Obviously, within Cubase, you have the ability of doing more graphic editing. And I think the Dorico perspective is more like, okay, this trumpet player is going to play with accents. This string player is playing legato in this passage and staccato in the other passage. So it's more kind of, so I think you can get the same results, but it may, it's just kind of a different approach where you want to see it from the music notes or you're looking at it graphically in a key editor. But I think they both will do the trick for you, but it's kind of really whatever perspective, some people, can never imagine composing in a sequencer, and that's how their workflow is. And some people can never imagine composing in a notation program. They may go, oh, that's great, until you're doing a film score and the conductor says, yeah, we need to drop 4 frames here. And the film, someone doing it in a notation package may not, it may not be as viable for them. So to do changes like that, but as long as I think both of them work really well for doing key switches. All right, so we see Tim Weinheimer says, thanks, Greg. It's exactly what I wanted to do. Thanks, Greg, Cubase Jedi Master. All right, so we see Jan in Stockholm joining. Sorry, my chat field jumped. See, Jan's having some internet issues. All right, I see Michael Teams has granted me 1 gallon of chocolate tuxedo cream ice cream. Thank you. It's very generous. Always appreciate it. Okay. All right, make sure I didn't miss any questions here. All right, so we have Rick Show. Just says, Greg, a question. I have several drum MIDI files on my hard disk. How do I best audition them with a kit in Groove Agent as the mapping doesn't match? Example, need to remap in order to audition the files. So once we have so I'm going to come over here. Let's add a instrument track. So let's say, okay, let's come over. We'll open up a Groove Agent, and let's say we have a kit and the sounds are kind of different. And they're not aligning. So let's say, okay, we'll open up. Very uninspiring drum example I pulled up. All right. So when you go to and so if you have drum sounds that aren't aligning, with your particular sound set here, one of the things that you could do is if you go to a drum map. So let's say one of the things we could say, okay, let's create a drum map from the instrument. And now when we double click on an event, and you slide over, we have in note and out note. So this way we can say, okay, their kick drum that's coming in on a C1, I want that to come in on, C sharp 1. So if we go directly to kind of edit the drum map here, so let's come over, and we could go to the drum map setup. Here we could actually choose that, this particular note here, the in note is B1, and then you could just simply remap it to different pitches. So this way, if you get drums where all the MIDI notes are assigned, you don't have to necessarily physically move all of the drum to the correct pitch. You could just remap the particular drum. So, okay, C1 needs to go to B0. You could just come over here and remap. And you could also choose for this to go out to different sources as well. But go into the drum map setup. So, and we'll see this under the routing tab. And you'll see for your drum map setup. And then you could just say, we'll come right over here, and you have the in note and O note. So you have in note, out note. So this is what is in the MIDI file. This is what note we want that sound to play. So you could remap the notes that way. All right, so we see from Fly V, does R plus W enable you to change some effects during playback? So yeah, you can, we can think of W as write automation, and R is going to be the read automation. So if I was taking, let's say the acoustic guitar here. So let's say we'll just take So now if I wanted to like automate different parameters here, I could click on the right. So if I wanted this to fade in, or if I wanted to pan, and let's come over here to the EQ. So let's say, okay, it's and now everything that I just did will just kind of play right back. So now I take moving my cursor over here, so this is all just playing back and automated. So W will record or write the automation, and R will read the automation. So, and you could do it for, basically any parameter in the system. All right, see Fadi Gurgis 6423 says, "Hi Greg, how to show the chord track in score editor view in Cubase?" Okay, so let's come over here. All right, so let's say we have our chord track here. So once we have the chord track defined, and let's say I come over, now we go to the score editor for our piano. We can see that the chord tracks are automatically showing up in the piano editor here. So in the score editor rather. So, and I think maybe if we go to the score editor and let's say if we could choose to hide different things, but yeah, it's basically by default the chords in the chord track will automatically populate in the score editor. So you don't have to do anything special. And if now it's in 14 and later, in 13 and earlier, there's like, if you go to the score editor, you'd see advanced, and then you say show chord track or show chords, something along those lines. All right, so we see Patrick Emanuel, great to see you on, says, "Hey Greg, if we had a reverb in a drum machine, it's playing on main track, it's not playing in output track. I want it to be separated in effect. How to do effects we add in drum machine should be separated." All right, so okay, so let's say I'm going to program a quick beat here. right, so we have this going on. So let's say if we add the reverb in the drum machine. So what I could do now, so let's go back to our drum machine. All right, so let's say, I want to take the snare, and as we do this, let's just go to our reverb, and let's say I want to add a delay on the hi-hat, so we'll just add a delay. So now as we're doing this, everything is still going out of the particular track. And if we want to, come over here to the group, we could just say, okay, I want to add the congas. We could say, okay, I want to add, reverb on my different sources here as well. We could route these to, different outputs. So if I want to take this snare here and say, okay, let's route that to output 2, we could just, so now we go to our mix console, we can see that the snare is going out of its own output. Okay, so just make sure we got it. It says, hey Greg, we add reverb in the drum machine, is playing on the main track, it's not playing in the output track. If I want it to be separated in effect, how can I do that? All right, so let's say if we want like maybe its own effect returned, so just in case you want to do that, let's come over here. So let's go back to drum machine and see if we could let's see if we could route this to its own output. Okay, so let's come over here to the group. So let's say, but let me know if you want the reverb to go out of its own output, if you need that. But you could, have varying amounts and then feed that to each channel with its effects to different outputs. All right. All right, so we see from Sue, it says, hi Greg, is there a reason why when I hot swap files from Media Bay to Sampler, the Mac Mini M4 OS crashes consistently? So I have a Mac M4, so let's give it a try. All right, so let me just, I'll add a sampler track. All right, so let's go to the sampler track here, and let me drop some samples in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we'll just play. All right, so we have, so I'm going to activate the sample. So I'm going to say apply hot swap. Okay, so I'm going to just do the preview here. then if I wanted to swap the sample out, I just click there and we just update it. Make sure that, sometimes, make sure that if you're doing it to like a custom created folder, that the folder, you have user permissions for that folder. So it could be maybe a user permissions for the folder. Just run into that Mac OS. So we see from Chinhan, just says, hello, is it possible to change the color of muted events? I think that they're always going to be kind of white, just to indicate that they are muted. So if they're selected, so I don't think that is adjustable. So that way it's kind of consistent through. Let me just take a quick look. Let's see if we could do that. So we'll go here to yeah, I think it's kind of fixed, but I'll pass it along as maybe a future preference. All right, so we see Roland Steps has got Dash. Greg, just want to say huge thanks for all your help throughout 2025. Have a great break, and greetings to all the Cubase community from Sussex. All right. All right, so let me go to some of the questions that we had that were mailed in before we run out of time. I'm going to quickly show the Zoom info here. So this is the meeting ID. So we'll get started in about 20 minutes, as well as the passcode for that. All right, so first question was how to create click tracks for different musical subdivisions. Okay, so let's say we have our click track, and if we're in 4/4 here, now what you can do is we could see kind of like your click track here, and we have like what we call click track pattern. So we could just come over here, so we can see that if I wanted to change, like if I want this more, and we could change the click track here. Let's come over and say, okay, I want different pitches for different beats. But if we wanted to say, okay, I wanted this to be like in cut time, there's different presets that you could have. So you can say, okay, let's do half tempo. So I just want 1 and 3. Or I want it to be double tempo, where we hear eighth notes as well, or 6/8. So now if we come over, let's say we do our default and we want this pattern again to open this up, you could just come right here and you may just extend over. So now let's say, okay, I want it to be like quintuplets. So we could say the number of clicks I want to be, we could set to 3 clicks in. But I could also just say, okay, let's make it 5 clicks. So if I want to do quintuplets, so that's 5 clicks within a 4/4 bar. Or if we wanted to do, 7 clicks, and we wanted to be like a 2 + 3, or 3 + 4 rather. So even though it's playing the same tempo, we could take our click track and have it subdivide to fit different musical subdivisions, just like that. Okay, next question. Hi, Greg. I want to phase align 2 snare tracks that are not a multi-recording and are not quantized to the grid. I want to keep the groove timing of one of the tracks. Can I use warp markers created on one track and use them as anchor points for the other track so I could visually move the audio to create of that other track to the nearest warp marker, or even better, snap to it? I think what I would do and I've done this before on like multiple recordings. So let's say if we have a like a multi-track drum recording here, let me activate this, and we'll revert the project here. All right, so if if my two, like let's say my snare top and bottom were out, where, they're two different recordings as you mentioned. So I'll just kind of come over here and let me nudge this. I'll do just by say I'll just do it by like 10 milliseconds a few times. So let's say if we're listening to our snare top and our snare bottom here. All right, so what I would probably do is just say, okay, this is the track that I want as the basis. I would come right over here to the alignment and say I want to add this particular track. And so that's going to be my reference track. And now I want this track as the source. And then just click Align Audio. And then the two tracks will be aligned. So you could manually do it, but it's a perfect scenario to take your original track. So you go to your audio alignment. You can see the icon here. You can also access it directly from your, from the audio menu. Let's see where it's at. But, so just take that, just come right over here, set the one as the reference track, set the other one as a target, and align the audio. So that'd be kind of the easiest and fastest way to do it. All right, so we see a question. Hi, Greg. When using the VST plugin manager, does the hide option cause the plugin to no longer be scanned on startup, or is that just a visual thing? How about making a smaller collection? Same question. Does it help on scanning startup, or is it the only way to change scanning startup by actually moving a plugin in or out of the VST 3 or VST 2 folder? So I think it's going to scan all of the plugins. And I think the thinking is that even if it's not in your if it's not in your plugin collection, that let's say if you install a new plugin, it's going to scan that plugin, with the premise that you might want to add that plugin, even if it's not currently in a folder. So I believe all of the plugins will always be scanned. So if it's hidden, you just don't see it visually. But they will be scanned and kind of tested, and if it's going to be put into a block list, it will go through that process. But the VST plugin manager will just kind of do kind of visual organization, so that once you're doing here, you could have collections of your VST instruments, but it's not going to filter those out. So if you don't want the plugin to be scanned, take it out of the folder or uninstall the particular plugin. All right, so we got a question mailed in. It says, good morning. I read that many artists such as Dr. Dre, John McLaughlin, Herbie Hancock, Billy Preston, Chick Corea used Yamaha PSR keyboards. What's your opinion about this keyboard? What are the most used sounds, voices by the familiar artists? So, the Yamaha, so obviously, a lot of those users have been, longtime Yamaha users, because Yamaha is the world's most popular synth and keyboard company. So sounds that come out in a keyboard, from kind of usually like a product development perspective, like a sound that was like, in a super expensive keyboard 20 years ago, I think companies will look at it. It's like, okay, we've made all of this money on a flagship product with this sound. Now we're coming out with a new flagship product, but that sound is still really good. So, we could use that sound that was a flagship in a previous generation, and we could put that into like a PSR keyboard. So usually the PSR keyboards, for many people, it's their first keyboard that they ever get. So if you wanted to get a keyboard for your kid for Christmas, a PSR is a great choice. You get one for $99. It sounds way better than its price point. And it's because Yamaha, makes so many keyboards that, they could basically amortize or take the cost of the R&D that they did 20 years ago and spread it out. So that's how you could get a higher quality product for less money. Just because, Yamaha's made so many of those keyboards. So while there's, I'm not sure if every one of those people has used a Yamaha PSR or not. They probably have used sounds that are now currently in a PSR if they've been doing MIDI work for a long time and working with keyboards. All right, so we have another question. I imported some audio stems. Track 1 is not to a stable click track. Tempos all over the place, up and down, and all around. But music sounds good. Track 2, the next stem does not line up. Tempo seems to be faster. If you have time, how could I get track 2 to a faster tempo to just duplicate track 1 at the slower tempo track? Is there any way to just duplicate tempo on one track to another when neither track is set to a stable click? Yeah, so let's take a look. Show you how to do this. So often a lot of programs kind of fail when the tempo is fluctuating and it's not stable. So we'll come over here. Let me just import. Okay, so we'll import a couple files, different tempos. Okay, so say we have this file, all right, and then let's import another file. Okay, so we'll take a quick listen to the particular files here. And let's listen. So that one's going to be fluctuating. This one is faster. So what we could do is just do a quick tempo detection. So I'm going to select each event here. I'll select one event at a time. We will say, let's come right over here and go to your project menu to tempo track. And I'm going to say tempo detection. We'll do an analysis of it. So when we look at this now, we can say, and I turn my click track on. All right, and let's listen to this tempo. So I'm going to select the other file and do the same thing. So we'll come right over here. Say, let's go to our tempo track to tempo detection, analyze. All right, so we can see that this is a faster tempo. All right, so now listen to this. Let me let you know what I'm about and what is in, what is outside in the code I walk. All right, so what we want to do now is we're going to take this particular file and we want to basically we want to embed this tempo information, this detected tempo information into the file. And we do that by going to your audio to advanced, and we'll say set definition from tempo. We could save it into the project file or into the audio file itself. I'm just going to do it in the project file. It doesn't really matter in this case. And I want to do the same for this particular file. So we'll come over here. And again, audio, advanced to, again, set definition from tempo. All right. So we can see that this song is slower. This one's faster. So if I drag this file over to this amount of time, this one is going to be playing at the same tempo. So this is, now that we've done that, this file here is basically going to be almost like a tempo parasite. So we'll play it. And this is kind of an extreme amount, but so if I put the other song on, they're both playing at the same tempo. Now conversely, if I, let's say I put that file back and I move this file, the slower song, to start at the same point. So now this song is going to be playing faster to match this tempo. So we'll take this. So this track is automatically following the tempo from that tempo detected track. So put them into different areas, do tempo detection, select the events. You can select multiple events if you want to go to advanced, set definition from tempo, and then that file will react dynamically where it was speeding up and slowing down, and it will compensate for the tempo variations to match the current tempo track. And if I wanted these all to play back at a steady tempo, I could just disable the tempo track, and now both of them will play back. So now this one's going to be playing slower. And if I now, so I just have it doing a steady tempo. So say 140. So now they're both playing again at the same tempo. So give that a try. All right. All right, let's jump back to our live questions. We'll be migrating towards Zoom here in just a couple minutes. Thanks for all the great questions. And again, you can always send questions to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right. All right, so we see Studio Dowdy says, if I create a new style, how can I save it to the preset, but inside Groove Agent? I mean, if I want to open an X style, opens with my kit in full patterns. Okay, so let's come over here. Okay. Okay, so let's just go ahead and build up here quickly. A couple of samples. Okay, so I'll just say okay, so I'm going to drag that over, and let's go hunt for hat. And do a quick snare. Okay, so now when I come over here, let's get to our player. All right, so we'll say All right, so let's go ahead here and let's say we have this. All right, my worst drum beat of all time. Let's save it as a preset. And we already have that preset, so let me just differentiate it. Okay, so let's come over here. Let's cut the agent, cut the kit. All right, so we have no samples, load it up. Now let's go to our user presets, to VST instrument. All right, so I load up different kit here. So let's look at load a preset. So here's our December 19th, 2025, or _2. And now you can see that our kit is loaded up here. And our pattern is also loaded up. So when I hit play, I have the same awful pattern right there. So again, just save it as a preset, and then your patterns will automatically be recalled. All right, I think we have time for one more question. As we see from Sue, just asks, recently bought Halion 7. Is it correct I cannot preview Halion's presets, perhaps from within Media Bay? Not working for me, thanks. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up Halion 7. All right, so let's say, okay, I want to come over to, say, FM Lab. Okay, so I'll load up a preset here, and we just, all right, so I think if we come over like to our main media bay here, so let's say, go home, we'll say our VST instruments. Let's say we want to go to Halion, and now that I have that open, let's come over here to my FM lab. So now when I come here, I could click and preview the presets. I say, okay, I really like that one, double click, and now that particular preset will automatically be loaded up for you. So that way you could just double click and have access to play that particular sound. All right. Let's see if there's one last minute quick question. All right. All right, so we see from Brian Jones, 8432, says, hey, Greg, is there a way to zone channels in the lower pane mixer, such as the zone controls of the dedicated mixer window, put main bus on the far right while keeping the other tracks on the left, etc.? Okay, so let me just add a number of different tracks here so we can have more. Okay, so we'll come here. All right, so now when we kind of scroll over, you know, we can, so we want that there. So I think if we just go to the visibility here and go to zones, So let's say we want our input output channels, so we'll say our stereo out. So now as I scroll, we could have the stereo out anchored to the right hand side. So again, just go to the inspector, select visibility, and then you'll on the bottom select zones. You may see like the input output channels may not be exposed. And then you could have that anchored to the left, in the center, or anchored to the right. And as we scroll, you can see that that master channel is going to be preserved. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and start the Zoom. So I'll paste the link in the chat. But for those people that want to just log in via the meeting number, so here's the meeting ID. And again, if you're watching this afterwards, this will just be live. It's not going to be recorded. And here's the passcode for that. I'll go ahead and start the meeting. All right, so we see people joining, so the link seems to be working. All right, we see Peter. All right. See Cubase Nation Discord, Jazz Dude, probably. All right. You see Da Vinci Girl, John Barry, Michael Marshall, great to see you.
Howdy, howdy.
Hey. I don't know if you can see me. Can you see me? Does this work?
If you're Brian Sawyer, then yes.
Let's see.
Make sure I haven't missed
I
anyone.
don't know why.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Give it a couple minutes, let people transition over.
Hey, Greg, man, those mail-in questions are fantastic.
Learn some new tricks.
I tell you, man, it's just, there's so much in this software. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. Does one or two things.
Jeez. Yeah.
It's kept me employed for many years. So, yeah.
No kidding, man. I mean,
All right,
understatement
you
of
see
the
Thomas
year.
Van Dyke joining. Great to see you on.
So do I just get the picture of my cat here or what?
Is your camera turned on?
Yeah. Let's see here. More
Turn my
fiddling
camera
with-
on here.
Let's see, camera. Where is it?
I see Vince.
All right, Michael Teams joining. All right.
There's Greg.
Give it a couple more minutes, and then we'll shut down the
Video. Okay. The big button right in front of
Bottom
me.
left-hand corner.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
I have arrived.
I'll alert the media.
Yeah, something wrong with me.
Ooh.
All right.
Hello, yes, Wilfred. I will look, maybe Daniela is able to come also inside the Zoom stream. Okay.
Wow, I have a really late echo.
Yes, Wilfred. I will look, Daniela is able to come also inside the Zoom stream.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is
All right, see Rick is joined. Great to see Nick on and Lawrence. All right, so we have Ralph joining. See if anyone else is.
Rick is joined.
T. Thanks, Peter. That's what I need, a T.
English breakfast, buddy.
Oh, is that right? I think I have Scottish. I'm sorry.
It's
Dash of honey.
the Mojave will do that for you.
That's right. Yeah.
All right,
You
I'm
get
going to
three
shut down
buttons.
the live stream here real quick. Transition over. Give me just a second.
Nice.
No, actually, I have poor T. I'm a snob, but yeah, I love that stuff.
All right, I'm going to shut down the live stream here real quick. Right. Transition over.